You all know Doug, but just as a refresher, he is the son of Chinese immigrants. He is a graduate of Stanford University. He received his law degree here at the University of Hawaii. In the last 2 decades, his professional experience has included the Honolulu Prosecutor's Office. He was appointed first deputy prosecutor and later as the acting city prosecutor. He went on to serve as the managing director for our city and county of Honolulu and managing partner at Carl Smith Ball before taking a post as the city's AG in January of 2015. He is, of course, our chief legal and law enforcement officer, and earlier this year, he filed the state's lawsuit that ultimately halted the president's revised executive order on immigration.
Thank you.
That, of course, is why we are here this afternoon. And let's start with the headlines. Where are we right now? We just had a ruling on the Fourth Circuit. And just so that folks understand, maybe you want to give us a little explanation as how this is all working. There are basically 2 parallel lawsuits happening right now, the Ninth Circuit and the Fourth Circuit. Breaking news with the Fourth Circuit. Let's start with that.
Great. Okay. We have 2 cases going on right now. There's our case, which is the state of Hawaii, as well as an individual plaintiff, Dr. Ismail El-Sheikh, who's the imam of our local mosque here. Our suit is going on right now in the Ninth Circuit. We just had arguments May 15th in Seattle. That's just where it turned out to be as far as the courtroom that was heard. The argument occurred in the Nakamura Courthouse, which was named after a Japanese American, someone who served in the U.S. military, and the courthouse was named after him, and it was a very historic place to be able to make those arguments. But over on the East Coast, there was also a lawsuit that was brought by several individual plaintiffs, as well as the International Refugee Assistance Program, which is a refugee program that was also suing the second executive order that issued the travel ban. And so that resulted in a decision that just came out that upheld an injunction against a critical section in the travel ban, which was banning people from 6 Muslim majority nations from coming into the country. So anyway, both of those cases are going on right now. I wanted to actually just say this is where I think the issues are boiling down to these 2 things, and this is where I see the arguments really kind of creating all the buzz and the controversy. So on one hand, what you have is basically this interplay between the president's power to be able to issue orders that basically are for the sake of national security, to protect the country, to protect our national security interests, to look after our public safety, to go based upon the intelligence, sometimes secret intelligence that he has, or she would, to be able to make a decision like that to protect our country, versus the president's obligation to basically not discriminate against people, not violate the Constitution in a way that discriminates against people based upon their their nation of origin or based upon their religion. And so that's actually the tension that's going on in these discussions. Is on one hand you have the U.S. government that's arguing that the president's power is basically unreviewable. That essentially, if the president makes that kind of decision, we should respect the separation of powers. We should, the courts shouldn't be, suffocating a president or stopping him or preventing him from somehow doing what he needs to do to be able to protect us. But then on the opposite side, I think our argument is that, we really believe that, the president has a lot of powers, and there's a lot of ways that he could be able to protect our borders and protect our national security without violating the Constitution or without violating people's civil rights. And in fact, I think there's so many great commentaries that have been written about this whole case, but I remember one person who wrote that, I mean, the whole point is that if the president was actually suspending our civil rights in order to protect everything that our country stood for, which is civil rights, then that's not really what's he doing? Then that's in many ways he's supposed to be our president ought to be doing things that are within the boundaries of our Constitution, and that's certainly our argument. Okay, so then if you'll let me do the other one. So the second one, just so you guys know, is that it has to do with the fact that the second executive order, when it came out, it had a lot of basically what the legal term is facially neutral language, and all that just means is that when you read it, it kind of took away what was arguably, it took away what was so objectionable in the first executive order. Like the first executive order was pretty blatant. It just said, with very little justification, it just said, if you're a Syrian refugee, you are not coming into this country. That whole program is suspended indefinitely. If you're from these 7 Muslim majority nations, you are not coming in. I mean, it's just there was just a lot more incendiary language that was in it. But then the second executive order, which came out after the court struck down the first one, was basically more neutral in tone. So the argument that's going in front of the court right now is that on the U.S. Department of Justice side, what they argue is that you just look at the document, right? I mean, the document is neutral. You don't go and try to psychoanalyze what the president was thinking. He went back, he did his homework, he wrote a neutral document. He had his attorney general and his secretary of state, or excuse me, his director of Homeland Security sign off on it. So we're not going to look past that. And our argument is actually it's the opposite. It's that the context of what this new executive order says, it matters. You have to not just look at the neutral words of a document, but you have to look at all the statements that were made that surround the making of this document. So therefore, all the things that President Trump said, dating all the way back from 2015 when he was a candidate on the campaign trail to the time after he was sworn in as president, then he made a lot of basically anti-Muslim statements, or just freely admitted, without any shred of conscience that this was a Muslim ban. So that's the interplay that's going on, and so I will get back to what's actually interesting about the Fourth Circuit opinion was that it really had some great language that really supported the position that we were arguing. In fact, I'm paraphrasing everything. So I won't do justice to what the chief judge wrote in the Fourth Circuit. But what he said is that it's basically this executive order just has vague references to national security, while on the other hand it's just dripping with discrimination and animus and discriminatory intent. So really there was some very strong language supporting the fact that you can't just get away with saying that this is now a neutral document when all of us who've watched and read about this, we all know it's a Muslim ban. I mean, it's everybody, people on the street would just say that it's a Muslim ban. So and I think that's where that becomes something that violates the Constitution.
When you went to the Ninth Circuit, tell us a little bit, behind the scenes. Give us a sense of what that experience was like. And also, I know that in our discussions ahead of this talk, you did mention that you had a lot of help from the community through Friends of the Court briefs. Tell us how that played into the arguments.
Sure, I'm glad to. So we've had some really great people that have worked on this case on behalf of the state, and so I'm going to embarrass a few of them who are in the room right now. So first of all, within the Attorney General's office, I see that Donna Kalama, who's sitting right there in the middle, she's wearing a pink shirt. She's kind of waving. Long time public servant, long time deputy within the Attorney General's office, as well as Josh Wish over here in the front row. Both of these guys worked very hard on helping us. Really a lot of help at the beginning of the case. In other words, just being able to work with the the Muslim plaintiffs that were part of our community, and to be able to put together the declarations that were able to support our complaint. There's some other people that were involved in the AG's office, and because a lot of you guys are friends, I'm just going to name them so you can tell them that I said their names. But it was Clyde Wadsworth, who just recently came from Alston-Hunt. He's our Solicitor General. Deirdre Marie Iha, Robert Nakasuji, Kim Guidry. I think that's it. Who am I forgetting? I think that's Clyde, Robert. Yeah, I think that's basically it. Me, and I did stuff too, but nah. But then, in addition, we because at the very beginning of this case, we knew that this is a case that's going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, this is the way it's teed up, what's happening. I mean, just the whole interplay about discrimination and national security. This is going to be something that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to look at, and so we were able to through an emergency procurement, we were able to get the services of Hogan Lovells, which is they're a very large national firm, and so their lead counsel was Neal Katyal, who's the former acting Solicitor General under the Obama administration, who has in his own. So by the way, he has a great Twitter feed, hashtag Neal Katyal, but he's also just got a long history of protecting people's civil rights, and has just been a great person to argue for us. So anyway, that was part of our thing, is that basically they charged us, to my mind, pennies in order to be able to represent us. It was their services were capped at $150,000, which is very low. Just think the city just approved $900,000 to defend the police chief and all of his litigation. So I mean, 150 grand. I mean, they let's just say they ran through their billable time by the end of March, and they already used up all the legal fees that they did. But along with him, he has a great team of people, which includes like the former Chief Justice Roberts' former clerk, who we had to argue the very first time. So those of you who are listening to our very first argument in March 15th, we purposely put her there because we wanted her in the record as somebody that had clerked in front of Chief Justice Roberts, as well as people who'd clerked for Justice Breyer, Justice Ginsburg, and so it's so there's a really very talented group of people. So anyway, okay, so we went to the Ninth Circuit, and I've got to say the judges they asked some really. They asked tough questions of both sides. They were very well prepared. I think probably the most encouraging thing out of all of it was that it was exactly the civil professional discourse that you would expect to have in the American justice system. So in other words, all the trash talk, everything that we hear on the news, I mean, all of us were, I don't think anyone was probably watching Fox too much in this audience, but we watch CNN, MSNBC, all the different stations that are on. All these people are yelling and screaming at each other. But I've got to say that the room could not have been more collegial and professional, and just we're gonna argue this, and we're gonna let these judges look at it. So one judge, Judge Paez, was to my mind, I think he was. He asked some very good questions that favored our side. The other two asked questions that I think were challenging to both sides, and they were along the lines of what I just talked about, as far as like the main issues. But we'll see what happens after that.
Where does it go from here? The Attorney General has made quite clear, Jeff Sessions, that he tends to take it all the way. Seems like you and the folks in the Fourth Circuit do as well. So this is teeing up to go to the Supreme Court, no matter what the ruling is at the Ninth Circuit. Right. Tell us about sort of what happens next. And also logistically, I think a lot of folks would like to know, since there are these two parallel cases, how do they become one?
Right. You and I were talking about this before, and I was saying I think I need a whiteboard in order to like flow chart everything out. So I will take a stab at it, knowing that there are some very incredible jurists that are in this room that could probably do a better job of explaining this. But basically, I think bottom line, it's up to the U.S. Supreme Court what they want to do. So if they want to hear both cases, they can. So right now you have the Fourth Circuit that has come out with a decision that favors the International Refugee Association, and it's upholding the injunction against the travel ban. And the U.S. government has indicated that they intend to appeal that to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we expect Tuesday, Wednesday, there will be some appeal, some sort of emergency appeal up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, so then there's our case. So our case is over here in the Ninth Circuit, and so there's kind of a buzz that people we're thinking it's going to come out this like sometime this week. Yeah, meaning next week. It's gonna there should be something that comes out because it's been a couple weeks since we made our argument. And so whatever that result is, then this is what happens. If the result goes against the state of Hawaii, then you have the situation where you have one circuit that looked at it one way and another circuit that looked at it another way. That is actually the almost the best example of the type of case that would go up to the U.S. Supreme Court, because that happens. That happens. You have circuits that, meaning appellate courts around the country that end up disagreeing, and so that almost tees up the issue perfectly for the U.S. Supreme Court to look at. And then essentially the other possibility that could happen is the Ninth Circuit could come back with a ruling that that favors us, so it would be consistent with what the Fourth Circuit has decided. And if that's the case, the U.S. Supreme Court still, one thing is that we would think that the U.S. Department of Justice would still appeal our case because we had a few other sections in the executive order that got enjoined as well. So assuming that continues to be enjoined, then the U.S. government would have no choice but to also appeal our case up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And there was some talk about prior to that maybe kind of like the U.S. Supreme Court might just leave it all alone. Like, in other words, if they came back with two decisions that were that kept the travel ban enjoined, kept it from going into effect, that Chief Justice Roberts or the U.S. Supreme Court, they might actually say, you know what, we're just going to leave it. We're just going to we won't touch it. We won't bring it up to the U.S. Supreme Court and just let it stand. So they could do that. But now that the Fourth Circuit came out with such a strong opinion, and U.S. Department of Justice said so strongly that they want to fight it, I think it is going to go up, and I think our case will as well. And then it'll be up to them if they want to consolidate, how they want to handle it. But in all likelihood, they'll handle both.
One way or another, you're going to D.C.
Yeah, and I think and that's the other point, is that I think if we lost, if the Ninth Circuit ruled against us, then we would appeal. Because then we'd think, well, we have a shot at trying to argue our position out there.
Let's go back to how this all began. You told a story at a dinner that I happened to be at about going to Washington and having an interaction with the president, and I wonder if you would share that with our audience today.
Right. So, and I think this kind of goes to just the sense of, I want to say this, just a growing distrust that I think we're having of, just sadly, of our highest forms of government, and just even what the people at the highest levels of law enforcement are saying about what's actually happening in our country. So let me just explain that. I come from law enforcement, so it's really funny. I joke with internally in my office that the result of this case is that we've become best friends with the ACLU of Hawaii, which is not normal. Just so you know, it's actually like I'm the government, right? So normally, if you read stories about something that the AG's office are doing, we're defending something that the state is doing. So normally you wouldn't like the positions that I'm taking because they're usually keeping what government wants to do. But anyway, so and I think along with that, I come from a place where I've always been very trusting of law enforcement. So I was always a prosecutor. I didn't do criminal defense. So I think just the way I was raised, I just thought, the police are always telling the truth, and they're always doing things correctly. I just come from that mindset. But I have to say that mindset got shaken up a little bit during this Washington D.C. trip, and so it's a annual trip that occurs in D.C. where they bring together the attorneys general from all the 50 states. There's actually more than 50, but let's just say the 50 states. I say more than 50 because there's territories and Guam and Puerto Rico and all those guys. But so we're all there, and so it started off with our new Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, coming up to speak to us and address us that morning. And then afterwards, we were all going to go visit President Trump and Vice President Pence at the White House. And I got to say that was the morning when, this was like in late February, so we were already in the middle of our, so just to put it in context, Ninth Circuit had already ruled against the first executive order. So it had already been banned down, but they hadn't come out with the new executive order. So we show up, and Jeff Sessions addresses us, and I've told this story before, but for those of you who didn't hear it, it really, for me, hearing it firsthand really threw me off, because basically he got up there and he begins telling, his introduction is basically, attorneys generals of the 50 states, I am here to tell you that crime in the United States is at an all-time high. It's the worst it's ever been. Murder is at an all-time high. In our largest cities, we have crimes occurring, in all these different locations, in Baltimore, in New Orleans, in Chicago, and he had numbers, the murder is up 10.3%. This is it's like it was in the 60s. That's how bad. When I was formerly an assistant U.S. attorney, when I first started off in this office, that's how bad it was. So I'm sitting there, with my colleagues who are Republicans and Democrats, actually. So it's a bipartisan group, and all of us are looking at each other, going, "Do you think crime's high? I don't think crime is. I don't think crime's up. Just that initial point that he was making, that crime is at an all-time high. I think crime's at an all-time low." And I'm sitting next to, we're alphabetical, right? So I'm next to Georgia and I'm next to Idaho, and they're both Republicans. And I'm turning to them going, is crime up in your state? Because I don't think crime is up, right? So and yet there he is. He's just saying it, as if we wouldn't even check, as if we wouldn't even, we don't even have those kinds of resources that we would know that, and yet there he is, just announcing to all of it, making a pronouncement, this is crime. And so then it just got worse, because then basically, because I just started writing down notes verbatim, and this is how I would summarize his speech as this. It was basically, crime is at an all-time high. The reason why it's so high is because it's being committed by people who are illegally in this country. Right? So the way so what we need to do is we need to remove people who are illegally in this country, and if we do that, crime will go down. Okay? That was his speech. It was those 4 points. And by the way, he actually had prepared remarks that are somewhere online, and he said, "I'm not going to do my prepared remarks." And that's what he told all of us. And so just hearing that was just, it was chilling. It was a dog whistle. It was just, it was wrong. It was false. And yet he was just saying that, and just saying it with such determination. And this person who was so far out on the fringe, of public discourse, is now saying this as if this is the facts, and this is what we need to do. This is how we need to solve this problem. And so anyway, that was rough. That was rough. That was like, okay, I think we have a problem with with what it was throwing me off, because I would normally have, just a natural trust of what our federal law enforcement does. I mean, that's I'm law enforcement, so we trust each other. We work together on this. But here you have this person at the very highest level, denigrating entire classes of citizens, just recommending that that this is the solution to solve our growing crime rate that doesn't exist. And so this is what he's saying. So anyway, then we went up to see President Trump. And so so during that question and answer time, he called for times of, he asked, he wanted to know if people had questions. So I raised my hand, and so he called on me, and so he asked me, and so I asked him, I wanted to ask you about the travel ban because it sounds like you're coming out with a second executive order, because that's what you guys are talking about. So I was just trying to, I think a lot of us in the audience were trying to understand, what are you trying to accomplish with this travel ban? What are your goals? Like, I thought that was about as diplomatic and as classy as you could ask the question. Not like, what are you thinking? But just really trying to be very, very classy. And so this, if you recall, was the same day as his address to the joint session of Congress. So it was kind of like his State of the Union. And if you recall, that was like early on, that was like the one day when he actually had a really good speech, like, and everybody was like, oh, wow, he actually, gave it. Well, actually, it was that he gave a decent speech, but everyone was saying, oh, that's just so great because he didn't offend anybody. He didn't, call for, some horrible, some dragnet or anything. He just didn't do anything like that. So anyway, he was very well, it really, his answer back to me was all talking points. He did ask me, he said, are you one of the states that are suing me? And I said, yes, we are. But he wasn't saying it in a like I'm gonna get you or it wasn't at all like that. It's just like, I really think we're like not even on his radar, but but he was just, I think he was just asking to know who his audience member was. And so then basically, his answer was, it was actually very well prepared. I mean, he just said, national security is very important to me. I understand that, I might make decisions that you might not agree with, but, that's my prerogative. And he even said, I think I care more about national security than you do, and everything, which was snarky. But see, again, I was trying to think, okay, well, I think he's just means by what he means by that is he's just saying that he's the president, so therefore he thinks about national security, which is what we all do now. We all try to he says things incorrectly, and we all try to make up for what he says. Like, I think this is what he means, and so I was trying to do that. Anyway, I left that trip. My point being that I left that trip very kind of shaken. Just okay, so now I've read about it. You hear commentators talk about it, but everyone's we all now look at it with a sense of bias. And are these people biased in terms of what they're sharing with us? But I felt like now I've seen it firsthand. And now, I've got to question, what is going on behind the scenes in terms of, because if they're saying this, without, they're the highest levels of government, and if they're saying these different things and just setting it all up in a way that is, carrying out something that discriminates against people, well, that's not good for Hawaii, and that's not good for, it's not good for the country, but it's definitely not good for the state. So there you go. That's what happened. It was quite a trip.
Story.
And I met Simone Biles that day. So that was so then that was the other cool thing, is that later on we did a public service announcement against underage drinking. So that was like one of the greatest days. It's just, I met all these different people, and and Simone Biles she was very nice.
That's awesome. And to that point of national security, because there are those in the community who perhaps disagree with the actions that you're taking on behalf of the state.
Yes.
We just had a terrorist attack in Manchester, and your point was that that's a citizen of England.
Right. So that, I think that's what that actually just underscores why the travel ban actually doesn't work, because the person who committed the Manchester bombing was a Briton. So he was originally from Libya, but he was from Britain. So even under this travel ban, if it was occurring, he'd be able to come into our country. So it actually doesn't make, there's nothing that makes logical sense about this travel ban, other than the fact that it just arbitrarily excludes people from 6 nations. I mean, there's so many people have gone into the fact that if you really were going to exclude people from certain countries based upon terrorist activities that have occurred in the U.S. or around the world, you'd be excluding Saudi Arabia, or you'd be excluding Egypt, you'd be excluding all these other countries, not the 6 that are under the travel ban. And then I should also point out, because this also came up more locally, because we had the person from Turkey that was on an American Airlines flight, who we read in the report. I mean, I didn't see it, but in the reports, then was that he tried to. He wasn't maybe mentally all there, and then he tried to storm the first class, or the pilot's the cockpit. So the point being, Turkey is not one of the banned countries. So so again, what it does, but what I see that happens, that I think ties into the sentiment that is against what we're trying to do, is that any time a story comes up like this, it just creates fear, and so the initial visceral reaction that people have deep down inside is, we got to do something about this, and I definitely, in the letters or the emails that are against what critical of what we're doing, it's always based on that. It's that you should, we're afraid of terrorists coming into this country. If you fight the president on this, then God help us if a terrorist comes through and kills us all. It'll be on you. It'll be I mean, just and which is very intense and hard to take, but on the other hand, it's understandable. The people just have this emotional reaction. I mean, fear is such a controlling thing, and it affects people, and makes them just want to think only about their own needs, and not necessarily what's going to be fair for everybody.
You mentioned that when you heard about the travel ban and the sentiment in Washington, that you thought that this is not something that's good for Hawaii. Talk about why Hawaii is the right state to launch this lawsuit.
Right.
How does our own history play into what you do?
Right. So I always felt like Hawaii has its own unique story to tell about this, and it really it's partly what we do to support the various religions that we have in our community, but it's also the fact that our community is so diverse ethnically. We're 20%. Foreign-born, so 1 out of 5 of the people who live here in the state were born in a foreign country, and that's not even counting the people, all of us who were children of immigrants or grandchildren. There are so many people who are in the state that have some sort of tie to immigration, and I think the other thing that really hit us about this was that when the executive order first came out, it was right at the time that several of the groups in here, were having commemorations for and basically talks that were talking about the Korematsu decision, which was the presidential executive order that was issued by President Roosevelt for reasons of national security that resulted in the internment of Japanese Americans and German Americans and Italian Americans, and what was the timing just couldn't have been any worse. So here you have this executive order it was issued 75 years ago, that really just caused so much pain, and just really it led to citizens being stripped of their rights. People who did absolutely nothing wrong were placed into internment camps. I mean, it was just such a degradation of what had happened, and all under the auspices of we need to protect our national security. Not a good chapter for all of us who kind of look back on that time. But when that came out, when those talks were happening, now you have this executive order where you have something very similar. It's not, of course, it's not internment camps, but it just felt like it was, I think to many of us in the office, it just felt like we were beginning to go down that road. That if we don't say something on this go around, then it might not be 6 Muslim majority or 7 Muslim majority nations at the time. It could be more. It could be other countries. It could be other religions, and there's all these talks where President Trump was getting mad at President Duterte, and I mean now they're great friends and everything, but back then they weren't, and he was mad at Australia, and there was just all these different things, and I think what we didn't like about the executive order is that there was just so much discretion that was given to the president as well as the Department of Homeland Security in terms of what they could do. So one of the things that you'd hear commentators say that we're supporting the travel ban is they'd say, oh, this is just temporary, right? I mean, this is just 120 days. They just want to take a pause in order to be able to do studies. But if you actually read first let me just say something about that, is that the Constitution is around for 365 days a year. So it's not just, so you don't just lift it for 120 days or for a day or something like that. So that's the most important thing. But what's worse about that was that there was just so much language in there that just said, we're going to study this, and then what we might do is we might extend it. We might extend it indefinitely. We might add countries, we might subtract countries, and so there was this whole arbitrary notion about it that kind of played into our arguments of, wait a second, there's this, immigration isn't supposed to be that. It's not supposed to be that arbitrary. It's actually Congress that's supposed to decide how immigration laws are. And here, the president is now saying, for reasons of national security, these 6 countries can't come in, and then we're gonna, we could just keep renewing this over and over again, and so that became a big problem. So anyway, that with everything that took place, I'm probably not, there was a lot of emotion that was tied to the Korematsu case and what happened there, but I think that's how we started reacting to what we were seeing with this executive order.
I know that in March there was a meeting of attorneys general here in Hawaii.
Yes.
Just so happened to be, and you said you're sitting next to Georgia and Idaho. What are you hearing from your colleagues in other states about the ban?
Okay, so first of all, what I would say that up until now, and this is actually something that I'm just so gratified about, is that when the AGs get together, so far, it's been very collegial and professional. So even though you have people from all different extremes, people are very good about how we talk to each other. Maybe we've all gotten to the point where we're politically astute enough that we can handle talking to people who are on the opposite side. I have to say that that is just so refreshing, because I think what bothers us so much now is that you just hear people yelling at each other and just really going straight into a very trashy discourse, starting with our president, and his tweets and everything. But it just it trickles down, obviously, to and influences everybody else. So far, it hasn't trickled down to the AGs. I have to say that among many of the states, most of them blue, most of the Democratic states, there's just been a big revitalization amongst that group about we have got to we've got a president that's going one way, we have a Congress that is supporting the president. If there's going to be any check on this, then we need to fight it in the courts. And so there's been a lot of great talks, and so obviously, Washington, state of Washington, Bob Ferguson, who's my colleague out there, he'd issued the lawsuit against the first travel ban. But there's other great AGs, Maura Healey, who's in the state of Massachusetts, Carl Racine, who's the DC Attorney General, and of course California, Xavier Becerra, New York, Eric Schneiderman. All of these guys, they're really picking up different issues, whether it's healthcare, Obamacare repeal, or Planned Parenthood, and sort of the attacks that are going on against the funding of Planned Parenthood, and they're really trying to figure out different ways to be able to fight what's happening. So I'm going to say one more quick thing about that. Sorry, which is you have a whole list of questions, and I'm not letting you get there. But so, I was on. I'm not sure if I can give this shout out, but I was on PBS Insights last Thursday, and so Randy Roth was with me on that panel, and so he brought up the point that actually under President Obama's administration, that there were a lot of Republican AGs who took a lot of stands and filed lawsuits that were against Obamacare, or against different positions that were taken by the Obama administration, and he was kind of slyly pointing out that at that time then that maybe the people who were in support of President Obama didn't say so much about that. But I think his real point, and I thought this was what was so great, is that he acknowledged that that's actually a good thing. That's actually, if you have the checks and balances in our system going on, if you have one side that's trying to fight against a decision that's being made by another branch of government, that's actually good for the country. So however things shake out, it gets people engaged. It helps people to understand what are the different issues that are going on. So so I look at it as it's a stressful thing, but it's also a very healthy thing.
I definitely do want to bring in the audience. I know we have some questions, so let's bring those up. And while we're waiting for those, I wonder if you would talk about your own personal history, about being the son of immigrants, and how that plays into your motivations as well.
Right. Well, my parents came from they left China. Actually, whoops, excuse me. My parents they left China back in the when the communists took over. They went to Taiwan and went to college out there, and then they ended up settling in Seattle, and that's where my sister and I were both born and raised. And so at the time that they were trying to come into the United States, then there were Chinese exclusion acts. There actually was laws. There were immigration laws that specifically banned people from, or made it very, very difficult for people from certain countries to be able to enter in or become citizens in the United States. And so that's by the way, that's part of our argument, is that so here Congress did away with these Chinese and Japanese exclusionary acts back in 1965, but then here we are 51 years later with with President Trump issuing something that is bringing us back to a time when you actually could just take countries and just X them out and just say, if you're coming from this country, you're presumptively, in these cases, you're presumptively a terrorist, and you're going to have to overcome that. But I got to say this, that I'm gonna throw out this story because my mom always told me this story about how when I was a kid, basically she saw all these. She saw these kids. It was at our church, and so she saw all these kids playing, and so there was these. They were all playing like a stepladder. They were all walking up the stepladder, and then what they would do is they'd get on top, and they would jump from the stepladder, and then they would run down and then laugh, and then come down and go around and do that. Come back and get in line. So I was part of that group. I was 3 or 4, and so what happened was that she just tells the story. She was watching, whatever all the kids were doing, and she watched me, and I got up on the stepladder, and I took all the way, and I got up to the top, and I looked down, and I shook my head, and then I backed down, and I went back down. And so she tells this story, and she said, and that is why she never gave me a curfew. She said when she saw me do that, she said, I knew I would never have to worry about you. And so she said, I never had a curfew. They never asked me where I was going. They never asked me who I was hanging out with. And I kind of wondered that. I kind of thought, because I noticed, I'd compare, I'd say, wow, my parents never, they never put me on a curfew or anything like that. But then when she told me that story, I was slightly offended when I heard it. But then I also thought, son of a gun, she's right. She's right. I always came home at a reasonable time, and if my friends wanted to do something, I say, well, I don't think that's really a good idea. I think that's gonna, and so clearly I was set up to be a lawyer because I was very risk averse. But I think that one thing that was very special was that I think when so whatever has happened in in my life that's gotten me to this point. I mean, I think when this case hit, then it did hit personally. Not that this is my own personal vendetta or anything like that, but it did hit me personally because I just thought about the sacrifices that my parents had made, how much they just really left behind so much in order to be able to come to the U.S. and just give me and my sister a better life. And so I really, I appreciate them, for that. Later on, I just, because the Ninth Circuit case was in Seattle and my parents they're in a retirement home in Seattle, I was able to visit my mom and, my dad too. And my mom said this because English isn't her first language. And so she actually said, so I've seen you on, I watched you on TV and, it seemed like you were talking about something that was very heavy. That's she says, you seem very, you seem very serious. It was very heavy. But she said, but then she told me, she said, I know you're doing the right thing. I'm proud of you. I love you. And it was just such a great, it was great because I think, she'd always been the one to kind of, my parents had always been the ones to kind of coach me to, not take risks. But doing something like this, I think was, I think they were able to see the good that came from it.
I mean, that's really interesting because you talked at the beginning about how you're someone who's always following the law,
right?
Right.
Right.
And now that you're risk averse, you're not necessarily the one who's going to go up there and challenge the president.
Right.
What is this role like for you then?
It's not, it's not easy. I think I've grown too. I mean, I think people in my life have really helped me. My wife is here. People have really helped me to kind of grow as a person and to not be so risk averse, but and also to kind of be more thick-skinned about different things. I just think it's important enough. So I will say the encouragement helps as well. So thank you for your applause and all that stuff because that's really good.
Well, I want to bring the audience in, and I know we're not going to have time to get to all of these, but let's do our best.
Right.
So let's start with this. Through this case, to what extent are you hoping to define the limits of the presidential authority on immigration and national security?
Okay. Now, great, because that's actually a really good point. Is that the president, especially when it comes to immigration, it's like its own little. It's like its own world, and the Congress has a lot of authority to decide immigration laws, and then they delegate a certain amount for the president, if he finds that entry would be, of certain people would be detrimental to the priorities of the U.S. I'm paraphrasing, but basically there's this whole point of just deference to the president, and I think ultimately it comes down to this. It's I think the easiest way to answer that question is that I really believe, and I think for those of us who are take this position, I think there's this feeling that like we don't care if terrorism happens, or that we're not worried about our borders, or we're not worried about our national security, or things like that. And and I think the response to that is, of course, we're all worried about that. Of course, we want public safety, and I think that we want, our current president to, to have, to be able to exercise his powers, to be able to, to ensure our national security. Of course, we want to do that. Just like we wanted President Obama to do that, or President Bush to do that. I mean, just ever since 9/11, we've always wanted our presidents to take, to take strong action. But we just don't want them to do it in a way that violates people's constitutional rights. We just don't want them to to do something that is such a wide, sweeping dragnet against a certain religion, or or a certain or certain countries, because that is not going down a good place. That is a dark, that's taking us down a dark chapter in history that we just don't want to repeat.
Is there anything Hawaii federal judges can do to push back on Trump's announced anti-net neutrality regulations on the basis of limiting citizens' rights to free speech, or any other legal reasoning?
Well, I think there will be. I think people will, because right now I think all you have is just a lot of, a lot of saber rattling that's coming from the president, and I think unfortunately, that has its own effect, because I think when the president declares that the media are enemies, or, that you end up with things like the Montana congressman who was elected, the violence that occurs against the media. There's another joke that was made by some other congressman. We see these stories, and I think that's what we're all afraid of, is that when all these things happen, it just numbs us. We just, none of us want to get to that place where we start accepting this. I think we all wanted to keep ourselves at a certain standard, and so I'm just saying that nothing has really, because no edict has issued from the government. There's nothing to challenge yet, but I think when it does, then then the proper parties that have standing will be able to they'll be able to fight it.
You said that you liked encouragement. How's this? Can you please be FBI director?
Oh no! Yeah. So we did, but I will say this, is that we did ask, we did ask me and. Was it, gosh, I want to make sure I get it right. So I think it was at least 20. So at least 20 other states, we called upon the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, to appoint an independent counsel, to be able to look into the FBI directors. His firing, as well as all the Russian meddling in the election. And that was just really important, because it just makes sense that you have someone independent, look at this, so that none of us, sitting out there watching what's happening, starts ending up feeling like it's rigged. We just don't want to be doing something like that.
Well, to that point, can you give your views on the likelihood of a thorough and fair investigation without politics of the Russia-Trump conspiracy?
Well, I think what's set up right now for Robert Mueller is, right now it looks like he has, the authority that he needs in order to be able to do a proper investigation. I think we can see that, the president is lawyering up, and so I think that's what I could see happening, is that there might be, a fight. There'll be some sort of fight from the president, and just to say, we're not going to allow James Comey to testify, or he can only talk about certain things, and things like that, and then all of his surrogates will defend it and say, of course the president has the right to defend, and all the rest of us will be thinking, you should just be honest. Just tell us what you're planning to do. But yes, right
so
now it looks good. Right
expect-
now it's hopeful. Yeah. Oh yeah. Very respectful of that.
Okay.
Of that process.
This is interesting. I've been in tough conversations regarding good immigrants and bad immigrants. What would you share with us how to navigate those tough conversations? And I'm guessing that you get those conversations yourself, given that people are pushing back against the actions that the state is taking.
Right. Well, I think, and honestly, I have to say that just even that kind of discussion, that's a genuine concern that people have, and the reason why I want to make sure that we're always acknowledging that is because I think that there's a lot about what people who are adverse to my position would say that just really resonates with people, and it's stuff like that, and I could actually get even more philosophical and say that, I think the hard thing about being, a minority, or being a woman, or being any sort of, minority class, is that you're always going through your life, hoping that, it's like everyone always has to be on their best behavior.
Right. Something bad happens, and you say, "Please, not one of us."
Right. Yeah. It's like it gets everybody. It's like it gets everybody else in trouble. And I think I've actually, when I'm in my risk averse standpoint, my mindset, when my mind gets twirling about that, then I start thinking, oh man, I just hope, I hope there isn't some terrorist activity that that comes from one of these countries, and because that'll just rev everybody up, and so look at that, that's exactly why we need to do what we're doing. But I think that's part of the talk. I think ultimately the proper way the proper way for the president or the executive branch to handle something like this is, I know this seems partisan, but it's really, there's ways that you can be very strict about immigration that just doesn't discriminate against people, based upon their nation of origin or based upon their religion. You can vet people, a lot more, individually as far as the threat that they are in terms of that, as opposed to if you're from this country, then you're presumptively a terrorist. President Obama, had very strict immigration policies. In fact, I think a lot of immigration lawyers didn't like those policies. They just thought that that's going, not unconstitutional, but it's going too far. So there's ways to do it.
Is there a reason for concern that the Trump administration could split up the Ninth Circuit? How big is this risk?
I heard, so Judge Clifton is our Hawaii, I'm not sure if I can, because he said this in a meeting. He said this in a public forum. He's our Ninth Circuit judge that's from Hawaii. That's part of the whole panel of people who could be Ninth Circuit judges. And so, I think, yes, that could happen. But it just seems like a lot of these threats that are brought up, they don't really come to pass. I mean, what Judge Clifton pointed out was that it's not that the Ninth Circuit is the most liberal circuit in the country. It's not. It's not the most overturned circuit in the country. And then more than that, he pointed out that the real thing is that the Ninth Circuit is so big that it actually has this huge caseload, and so it's really difficult. Like, even if they split it up, you would still have all the same technical problems that you would have. You'd end up with two arguably liberal circuits that are in the country if you did something like that.
If you know, and I'm assuming you do, please tell us what kind of preparation Neal Katyal, is it Katyal,
Yeah.
did to prepare, and remember hearing that he asked many top lawyers and judges to grill him too.
Oh my gosh, it's like these people are like they're like Olympians. I mean, it's just so for all those of us who are lawyers, I mean, we're people who are there's sort of these people who are at this. Not only are they very, very smart, but they are so they put a lot of preparation time. So even before the Ninth Circuit argument, we were all part of several mock arguments where actually the lawyer who argued the Fourth Circuit case, our people participated in a mock argument, a moot argument to help him prepare for his argument, and then they did the same for us. So I think there has been that work going on together, and then even in Seattle, then when we were there, then in the few days before, then some of the top immigration lawyers, Solicitor General from Washington, participated in a mock argument. So we've had a lot of just support. So appreciate that.
I know that you said that you're anticipating perhaps going to the Supreme Court in the fall. If the Supreme Court decides against the Trump migrant ban, what might be the consequences for the administration? What do you expect them to do next? I mean, I know it's hard.
They decide against them.
The administration. Yeah.
I get the feeling that it's no longer even an important thing to him. I think it was just, I don't want to psychoanalyze our president, but by the just sort of the way things have deflated in this issue, and then everything else is going on, I just feel like he's moved on. I mean, so they've done all these other ways to employ extreme vetting. My own theory is that I think the president was just doing this because that was his, he said it over and over. So he's always like, I'm going to keep my promises, no matter how, unconstitutional they are. So he issued it. He can just say, I did it. They'll rule. We'll see. We'll see it'll be a divided court, I'm sure, but we'll see what they do.
Please comment about how the president incites fear of immigrants in order to justify implementation of a police state, ICE,
Right.
and detention centers.
Right. So there you go. I mean, that's my point is that I have to say that I don't think I've always subscribed to that before. In other words, when I was I still am a prosecutor. So when as being in law enforcement, I think when I would hear something like that, honestly, I think I would normally react by that's kind of like the rhetoric that is given by people who, are just, always suspicious of the police and suspicious of law enforcement. But I have to say that after I heard, our U.S. Attorney General speak, that I started to develop that suspicion. I started to feel like, wait a second, I'm not sure, I'm not, and I think that's the tough thing. So I think there's been, I don't want to get too much into this, but there's been a lot of talk, about how are we going to handle our relationship with federal law enforcement, given all this. And I think what's tough about that is that the people who are on the ground, we're an island community, and so the people who are here who work for the federal government, we know them, they know us. I mean, it's like it's our wife's cousin, or it's our neighbor down the street. They're all people that we know, and so it's very hard actually to look at the federal law enforcement people who are here on the ground and say we don't trust you anymore. It's just because they're we see them at the grocery store. They're people who are part of our island community. We've always talked to each other, but I think that what's difficult about that is that I've heard the leader, so and now the leader has that's going to be policies that start trickling down, and maybe even the people who are here at the line, the front line level, they won't even, they might not even sense they're doing, they might not even have a sense of what they're doing other than the fact that they're just doing their job. Anyway, I'm not articulating this very well, but it's just that it's a difficult thing to work through.
I mean, this next question is a good follow to that, and that was a question: did you tell Jeff Sessions he was wrong about crime? Did anyone?
No.
How do
no. You know why? Because he actually when he was done. So first of all, there's this story about this where basically I did raise my hand to ask Jeff Sessions a question. And actually, I was going to ask him about marijuana legalization because previously there had been this, position that had been taken by the Obama administration, sort of, we'll keep our hands off of what the different states are doing. So I wanted Jeff Sessions to kind of articulate for us, what's going to happen under the new administration. And so you know what? He didn't even call on me. Okay, so here's the thing. So, and I'll tell the story about this. Is that basically I raised my hand, and I'm like the first person to raise my hand, and among all the AGs, and so he waited like 10 seconds and then called on somebody else. Right?
So selectively choosing,
right. Okay, so then
voices
I do
only.
it again. I raise my hand, when he goes, okay, next question, and then he calls on somebody else. Okay, and so then okay, so just so you know, I started thinking, well, maybe I just have maybe I have a chip on my shoulder, or maybe I'm insecure. I don't really, how do I know? I don't know, but. Then what happens is after this whole and then he just left, right? So then he gets whisked away with his entourage of security people, and so then basically then right after that, Massachusetts, the AG from Massachusetts, she comes up and she says, "Dude, I saw that. Okay, nobody, you had your hand up." You had your hand up, and he never called on you. I couldn't believe that. And then the New Mexico AG, who's Hispanic, he came up and says, I totally saw that. He was only calling on, like certain people.
Well, and you have to imagine that you have a room full of people who follow the rules, right?
Right.
So they're on it, and they're saying, "You're first."
Right. So they picked it up. So I wasn't just being, paranoid or like I'm a bitter person or something like that. I just, he really didn't call on me. So yeah.
I like this question because I think there is a sense for a lot of folks, given the fire hose of news that comes out of Washington on all of these issues, that we're feeling like overwhelmed.
Right.
And do you think that the issue of the court case on the immigration ban will help the nation come back to a more civil discussion on important issues?
Right.
In other words, is there good that's coming out of this?
Right.
Are we having conversations that we need to have?
Yeah, I mean, you guys are all here. I mean, people are really engaged, in the national government level than ever before. But I will say this. Yesterday I was with someone who is has a lot of influence, and I was in a meeting with that person, and then that person just shared this. They said, the thing about this travel ban case is that right now all of us in Hawaii, we're just feeling this, we feel something deep inside us that we just can't get our heads wrapped around. I'm paraphrasing again, but this is what I heard from him, is that he says, it's this anger, it's this fear, it's this, we just feel bothered, like by what's happening all around us. And he said, and what's so great about this travel ban lawsuit is that it allows us for a short while just to actually feel sane again. It actually helps us to feel the sense of relief that okay, actually there are judges out there, whether they're in the Fourth Circuit or in the Ninth Circuit, or the judges that are getting it and understanding it, saying no, you don't just get away with constantly saying this is a Muslim ban and then telling us, well, that was just my campaign statements. I didn't mean that. You don't get away with that. Your context matters, and I think that's where I think the reason why we gather together on a Saturday afternoon instead of napping or doing all the things we used to do 8 months ago is because I think we all feel this, and so it just gives us a chance to be able to be together as a community and somehow vent it and acknowledge it and somehow get a good sense of healing from it. So I do think this discussion, there is a positive component that comes out of all this.
What about citizen involvement? Other than reposting everything you see on Facebook, what is a way that people can actually engage?
There's this SNL.
Skipper,
the guy just repost stuff on Facebook.
But I do wonder, and you brought up the idea of these Friends of the Court briefs. I mean, those
Yes.
often come from organizations in our community
Right.
that people can join and be a part of and support.
Right.
I mean, how do you advise the average person? Because we're not in the AG's office, and so we don't
Right.
get that comfort from the judges that you're talking about
Right.
in the
Right.
same way. How do you advise citizens to engage on these issues?
Right. Before I forget, I want to make sure that I acknowledge that the Friends of the Court briefs that were submitted by a lot of the organizations that are represented in this room, they really mattered to the Ninth Circuit judges that asked questions on May 15th. And the reason why we could tell is because so many of their questions in the hour or so that this argument went actually referred to Friends of the Court briefs that were written. So then one of the judges, Judge Paez, actually challenged the U.S. Department of Justice Solicitor General Jeff Wall about this, where he said, you know what, you're taking, you're saying that this document is facially neutral, this executive order. It's a neutral document. So, but his point was, well, back in the Korematsu case, then wasn't the order, ordering Japanese internment wasn't that also a neutral document? Which it was, because basically the words in the document were neutral. It was basically telling that the not Homeland Security, but whoever was in charge of the security for the country, basically it was telling them that he now had discretion to be able to do a lot of things like intern people into camps. So his point to Mr. Wall was that was a neutral document. So are you saying that we shouldn't, are you saying that the Korematsu, just like the people who wrote, from the Korematsu Center, which was one of the Friends of the Court briefs, they pointed that out. And, and then actually, Mr. Wall is awesome. He's actually a very smart, there's a lot that's good about him. He wasn't sure because he hadn't read the, executive order recently from President Roosevelt. So he didn't quite know how to handle that. But it really put him on the spot because it was saying, that was a judge saying, I've looked at these other briefs that are submitted. So I want to make sure I acknowledge that, because not only were there groups that are represented here, there were many at the Hawaii level. There were many lawyers that had to step in to be local counsel to allow people to submit Friends of the Court briefs here. So people from Goodsell Anderson, Quinn and Stifel, people from Alston Hunt, Marjorie Bronster did one, Dwayne Miyashiro did one. I know I'm missing somebody, but there were some great local attorneys who stepped up to be local counsel for them. So I appreciated that.
And that's why supporting those organizations as an individual
Right.
is a way to engage.
Right, and so I think that's the thing is that there's actually this there's this whole story in the Old Testament of the Bible. So it's kind of like a Jewish Christian tradition story, but it's about this the person who became Queen Esther. When she became Esther, and she became the queen, and it was kind of through some very difficult circumstances. And so, what I always remember about that story is that is that her uncle then tells her, you've become, you've gone into this position for such a time as this. It's just because for this exact moment. You're in the position that you're in for this purpose, so you got to make the most of it. Again, I'm totally paraphrasing the Old Testament, which said it a lot better. But basically, there's this whole point of whatever position that you're in, there's something that you can do. And you're right. You don't have to be the attorney general, and you don't have to be a federal judge in order to do something about that. But what I do see is that there are so many people, even within this audience, who have gotten involved, who have either written letters or protested, or they went to the airport, when the first executive order came out, good for you, because that really made a statement, and it told the American public that this was an important issue for all of us.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to close out the talk. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today.
Thank you.
So Doug Chin. We want to invite Taylor back to close us out.